Two men commit the same serious crime. One, wealthy and connected, hires the best legal team in the state and walks free on a technicality. The other, poor and reliant on an overworked public defender, spends years behind bars. In the United States, you can't legally drink alcohol until the age of 21. Yet, across the border in Canada or much of Europe, 18 is the standard. In Italy, the law demands an adult child care for their elderly parent. In many Asian nations, this is simply an undisputed cultural duty. Which version of justice is truly real? From childhood, we're told a compelling, comforting story. Justice is blind. The law is equal for every person. The good will invariably be rewarded, and the wicked will be justly punished. The scales will always, in the end, find their perfect balance. But look closer at the shifting reality of the world. The same action that condemns a man in one region is tolerated or even celebrated in another. The very law that governed society yesterday can be rewritten tomorrow with a new election or a new judge. If justice is truly an absolute, eternal truth, why does it shift so profoundly with borders, with rulers, and with time? This is where the first essential crack appears in the myth. The deeply held belief that justice is eternal and unchanging is not a fundamental truth. It is a powerful, constructed myth. A myth robust enough to control entire societies. Because once you accept that justice is always fair, you stop questioning who defines it. You stop demanding clarity on whose interests it truly serves. Aristotle saw this central tension over 2 millennia ago. He argued that justice is never a single monolithic truth. It is fundamentally a principle of distribution, inevitably shaped by context, by power dynamics, and by specific political purposes. And if justice is about distribution, it can never be perfectly, arithmetically fair. This isn't a minor philosophical detail, it is a revelation. It means the justice you were promised is not a universal law written into the fabric of nature or commanded by a deity. Not absolute. If it is only a shifting, human principle of distribution, then what exactly have we been believing in all along? From the moment we were born into society, we were given a powerful story to believe. Justice is blind. The law treats everyone equally. The scales always find balance. This narrative was repeated by teachers, judges, and political leaders. It was carved into the slogans of nations: liberty and justice for all. It became a moral lullaby that we sing to ourselves whenever life feels overwhelmingly unfair. The idea is that justice is eternal, sacred, and absolute. But this idea was never innocent. It was a design, a construction carefully and strategically placed into your mind to make you obedient and passive. Why? Because societies cannot survive prolonged internal chaos. A government cannot function effectively if its citizens see the law as nothing more than raw power dressed up in legalistic words. People need to believe in fundamental fairness. Even in the absence of evidence, they need to believe the game is honest, even when the dice are visibly loaded. Psychologists have a name for this profound, defensive distortion: the just world fallacy. This is the deep, comforting conviction that good deeds will eventually be rewarded, and bad deeds will inevitably be punished. It makes the world feel fundamentally predictable. It allows us to explain profound, random suffering without forcing us to question the mechanisms of power that sustain it. It provides solace, particularly to those at the bottom of the system, even when that system has no real intention of lifting them up.
Think about how often this mantra is repeated. Work hard and you will succeed. Be honest and you will be respected. Do good and the universe will return the favor. But look at the cost of this belief. How many diligent workers died poor despite decades of backbreaking labor? How many honest whistleblowers were permanently silenced while the liars thrived in power? How many noble, selfless acts disappeared without a single reward? The belief itself is the trap. If you genuinely think justice is automatic, a built-in feature of reality, you will not resist when molded by power. Yet, rulers of every era have deliberately repeated the same pacifying story. They must. Because a society that stops believing in the fairness of its foundational rules would immediately demand radical change. And change is the one outcome the powerful cannot afford. The question is not simply, is justice fair? The deeper question is, why were you told that it was? Whose interest does this foundational belief protect? Whose power does it sustain? Once you see that justice was never absolute, the illusion shatters. And once it shatters, you face an immediate choice. Will you keep pretending the story is true? Or will you finally open your eyes to the machinery behind the myth? If justice were truly blind, the strong and the weak would stand on the exact same legal ground. But they don't. They never have. Look closely into the courtroom. The law may claim philosophical neutrality, but wealth tilts the scales before the trial even begins. One defendant can afford a team of specialized lawyers, expensive expert witnesses, and the resources for endless appeals. The other can barely afford an overworked public defender who meets them 5 minutes before the hearing. Both committed the same act. Both faced the same criminal statute. But their outcomes are not just different, they are worlds apart. This isn't a mere accident or a system error. It is the predictable, natural consequence of fundamental human inequality. Aristotle termed these differences physis, nature, the inherent advantages or disadvantages given by genetics, talent, circumstance, or birth. Some are born with health, innate talent, or generational wealth. Others are not. When the law enters this unequal picture, it rarely erases those differences. It almost always amplifies them. Sociologists refer to this phenomenon as the Matthew effect. For unto every one that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance. But from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. Exist, not by accident, but because they serve the financial interests of powerful corporations and the wealthy class. The pattern is clear. Justice, as written into law, inevitably bends toward those who already hold the levers of power. Yet, the illusion persists. We are told the law is the great equalizer, that in the eyes of justice, rich and poor are indistinguishable. But every case, every statute, every amendment tells a different, undeniable story. The paradox is stark. Justice promises equality, yet it is delivered through systems fundamentally built upon and sustained by inequality. It promises neutrality, yet it is constantly shaped by self-interested parties. It promises fairness, yet it structurally rewards those who can afford to tip the scales in advance. Justice always tilts, not because the philosophical principle of justice is inherently corrupt, but because it is carried out by human hands.
hands that are never neutral, hands that belong to rulers, lawmakers, and judges who are shaped by their own biases and beholden to their own interests. And here is the bitter truth we must confront. When you look for justice in the real world, what you are often witnessing is not pure fairness. It is power dressed in the elaborate, legitimizing costume of fairness. So when you hear that justice is blind, remember this: she is not blind. She is looking straight at whoever holds the purse, commands the sword, or sits upon the throne. For Aristotle, justice was never a single, unshakable truth. It was not a divine law written into the stars, meant to be the same for every time and every place. It was something far more human, social, and therefore far less perfect. He began his ethical inquiry with a bold claim. Justice, he said, is the highest virtue, but only in relation to others. Justice is complete virtue, he wrote, but not absolutely, only in relation to others. A man living alone in the wilderness has no need for justice. Justice only exists in community. It is a social virtue that governs how we interact, live, and distribute resources among one another. From this social starting point, Aristotle meticulously divided justice into two great forms:
scholarships for the academically talented, higher pay for the highly skilled, awards for the exceptionally creative. However, this form of justice inherently creates profound tension, because someone, the ruler, the government, the elite, must decide precisely what counts as merit. Who decides which soldier was braver? Who decides which worker contributed the most value? That critical judgment is never free from bias, and it is the very mechanism that allows power to subtly shape the definition of fairness itself. Where distributive justice is focused on dividing benefits, corrective justice is focused on repairing harm. When one person wrongs another through theft, injury, or breach of contract, the established scales of equilibrium are tilted. Corrective justice's sole aim is to restore that balance. Crucially, in this form, equality is not proportionality. It is strictly arithmetic. If 10 units were stolen, 10 units must be returned. A wound inflicted must be compensated by a payment or care of equivalent value. The goal is simple and transactional: undo the imbalance caused by the wrongful act. This is the bedrock of all modern tort and criminal law. Court orders, compensation payments, damages, and periods of imprisonment are all attempts to restore equilibrium when it has been broken. But here too lies a significant flaw. Some profound losses simply cannot be repaid or undone. No amount of money can restore a lost child, a permanently ruined reputation, or a life broken by violence. Corrective justice can only patch the wound. It can never truly erase the scar or the original damage. Beyond these primary forms, Aristotle also distinguished between natural justice and legal justice. Natural justice, he argued, is universal. Killing the innocent is morally wrong everywhere, regardless of the local statute. But legal justice is not universal at all. It changes completely with rulers, cultures, and constitutions. The legal drinking age, the precise definition of theft, the rules of inheritance, all are written by fallible human beings and shift constantly with time and political will. This reveals that most of what we call justice in our principles of distribution and correction. It was always about human judgment, not divine command. And because it depends fundamentally on human judgment, it can never be absolute. It will always be contested. It will always be influenced by bias. It will always be fragile. The powerful point Aristotle forces us to see is both uncomfortable and profoundly liberating. Justice is not the promise of perfectly equal shares for all people.
It is the complex, messy process of attempting to balance human lives in proportion to their roles, their actions, their harms, and their individual circumstances. It gives us necessary order, but never promised perfection. It gives us vital stability, but never true cosmic fairness. Justice is often celebrated as the highest of all ideals. The word itself sounds pure, promising order, balance, and morality. But Aristotle forced us to look into its shadows. The first shadow is the sacrifice of the individual. Justice, as a social virtue, serves the community's stability, often at the expense of the individual. A single person's suffering can be deemed acceptable if that suffering preserves stability for the many. We see this enacted daily in policies that benefit the majority but crush the minority. Entire neighborhoods displaced for infrastructure projects. Entire groups drafted into wars they did not choose. The pain of the few is coldly accepted as the cost of order for the many. And we are told, this is justice. The second shadow is political and contextual. Aristotle knew that every form of government claims its own self-serving version of justice. A monarchy calls it the divine will of the king. An aristocracy calls it the superior wisdom of the few. A democracy calls it the sacred voice of the people. But when you strip away the rhetorical slogans, the same pattern remains. Justice bends to whoever holds the throne, the council, or the majority. It is never neutral. It is never free from the dictates of power. History provides the stark evidence. Slavery in ancient Athens was legal and therefore just under that system. Racial segregation in modern America was once legal and therefore just under that system. The law declared it so, and citizens.
History shows us these two concepts diverge again and again. And when they diverge, justice, as written, becomes the mask of injustice in practice. So, what does this mean for you? It means that merely obeying the law is not the same as being a just person. It means that passively trusting the system is not the same as living a moral life. It means that the very thing you were told to revere as sacred can be corrupted, twisted, and weaponized against the powerless. The dark side of justice is not simply that it fails to be fair. It is that it can be actively used to legitimize unfairness, to dress exploitation in the costume of legality, to make oppression look orderly, rational, and tragically inevitable. If justice is not absolute, if it bends relentlessly to power, and if it can even disguise injustice, then why do people still believe in it? The myth survives because of psychology, the way the human mind craves certainty, and the way societies need stories more than they need uncomfortable truth. The just world fallacy is a narcotic. It tells you to endure injustice because eventually the scales will tip in your favor. This belief keeps populations governable and prevents dissent. But Aristotle shattered that comfort. He offered not despair, but a new path to freedom and action. It is not about waiting for the system to rescue you. It is about shaping your own life within an imperfect system. The first step is to redefine fairness. Stop thinking of fairness as identical outcomes. That illusion will destroy you. True fairness, in Aristotle's view, was not about sameness. It was about proportion, giving each person what is due to them relative to their role, their effort, and their capacity. This is not surrender. It is a call to responsibility. If you cannot expect perfect fairness from the outside, you must demand proportional fairness for yourself, not by waiting, but by acting. This brings us to telos.
Aristotle believed every human being has a telos, an inherent natural purpose or final end. The flourishing citizen is the telos of the child. Your primary task is to discover. This is not cynicism. It is the ultimate strategy. It is the refusal to let an imperfect, flawed system decide your fundamental worth. What this means in practice is you stop waiting for the world to become fair. You stop expecting institutions to suddenly balance the scales. You stop clinging to empty slogans about equality and start measuring your life by your alignment with purpose, the cultivation of your strengths, and the strategic choices you make about where to fight. This is the real escape from the paralyzing illusion, not abandoning justice altogether, but refusing to worship it as a god, not expecting perfection, but demanding proportion, not dreaming of fairness, but building excellence. Aristotle never promised a just world. What he offered was a definitive, powerful way to live meaningfully, strategically, and virtuously in an unjust one. And that is infinitely more powerful than the myth you were told, because the myth makes you passive, his philosophy makes you active, it makes you responsible, it makes you free. So ask yourself, will you keep waiting for the scales to balance, or will you sharpen your own edge? Will you discover your telos and live with the kind of excellence that no flawed system can possibly ignore? Justice will never be truly fair, but maybe that is not the point. Maybe the point is whether you will see through the story and decide what to do once the illusion is gone. Do you still believe in the blindfold? Or will you open your eyes and live with the clarity that only comes when the myth dies?